Brethren, what we see is opposition from the family and division within the family. Isn't it amazing? Jesus didn't come along and say, well, it's your enemies, or it's the government, or it's the communists, or it's the Muslims that are going to be your enemies. He says it's going to be those of your own household. Brethren, don't we have that here? We have young people that are coming to Christ in this church. And who oftentimes are the most bitter enemies? It is their parents. I have known the wrath of parents who cannot stand the fact that their children are coming to this church. But the real issue is they're following Christ. I oftentimes am the brunt of it because I'm the human figure that they can see and they can vent their wrath on. But bottom line, brethren, it's Christ who has brought that division. It's all of a sudden their son, their daughter is no longer on the same page. Their son and their daughter come along and they're ready to offend their desires. They're ready to turn against their traditions. They're ready to basically say no to their parents' wishes when those wishes go against Christ. And it brings division. It brings wrath. But this is the family according to Jesus. And I'll tell you, brethren, Jesus is unashamed and unafraid to tell you and me what the cost of being a Christian will be. He tells us the worst news right up front. That's the way it is with Christ. The devil's not that way. The devil, he likes to give you the best up front, and he hides the worst. He puts it in the small print, way down at the bottom, where it's real fine, and you can't hardly read it. What's that? I mean, in big words, sin is fun, pleasure. You will not surely die. But you start looking at the fine print at the bottom. Wait, the pleasures of sin are for a season. And then, what's that? And then it's appointed to us to die, and then the judgment, lake of fire. That's how it is with the devil. Christ, he comes and he says, I'm going to tell you the worst news up front. This is what it's going to cost you, count it. But you see, the devil has to hide it because what's down in the small print, folks, it doesn't, if we actually see that small print, we realize that the good that he offers us up front, it doesn't outweigh the small print. But it's just the opposite with Christ. Christ comes along and says, this is what it's going to cost you, but I want you to know this. There's an eternal way to glory at the end. What you're going to get is 100-fold, and at the end, eternal life. Whoa, that's reasonable. Jesus comes and he says, I want your heart. I want it all. I want you to follow me. It's going to cost you some of the nearest and dearest relationships that you have. It's going to sever things. He knows men tend to be tight with family. You've heard it before. This is well known among all the nations, brethren. Blood, it is so often says, is thicker than water, and you've got tight families, and Jesus comes along and he just blows that thing right up. He explodes it because he's constantly going to call people away from the same mindsets, the same goals, the same things that they're living for. Brethren, Jesus doesn't need to hide anything because basically the bottom line, it's a good deal. Brethren, some of you are familiar with this. This is another example. Adoniram Judson, famous letter that he wrote to Mr. Hazeltine asking for his daughter's hand in marriage. I have now to ask whether you can consent to part with your daughter early next spring, to see her no more in this world. I'm reading this because this is basically the way it is with Christ. He's honest right up front. And this is Judson. He's being honest right up front. He's laying it all out there on the table. Whether you can consent to her departure to a heathen land, you're not going to see her anymore in this world, and her subjection to the hardships and sufferings of a missionary life, whether you can consent to her exposure to the dangers of the ocean, fatal influence of the southern climate of India, to every kind of want and distress, to degradation, insult, persecution, perhaps a violent death. Is that how you want somebody to come and ask you for your daughter? Possibilities of violent death, persecution, insult, degradation. Can you consent to all this? Well, see, if that's all there was, brethren, it's not such a good deal. But when he puts it in this light, can you consent to all this for the sake of him who left his heavenly home and died for her and for you, for the sake of perishing immortal souls, for the sake of Zion and the glory of God? Can you consent to all this in hope of soon meeting your daughter in the world of glory with a crown of righteousness brightened by the acclamations of praise, which shall redound to her Savior, from heathens saved through her means, from eternal woe and despair? And brethren, I'll tell you this, 14 years later, that woman was dead. Smallpox. And all the degradation and all the persecution and all the trial and all the distress, it came on her tenfold, what I'm sure he could have even imagined in his wildest dreams. And she died and laid in a lonely grave underneath a tree. And years later, I think when he was married to his third wife, he talks about, you can see it, there's a picture of that tree online. I saw it this morning. He was sailing by somewhere, and he saw that tree way over there on the shore. And he said it was like opening up an old wound. His wife, her remains laid there under a lonely tree on the shoreline. Brethren, you ready to say goodbye to a father, a mother, a wife, a husband, a dear child of yours? Brethren, are we willing to live for Christ and give him our all? Brethren, we need to embrace the cross. He came and he loved and he gave. God so loved that he gave. Brethren, the very fragrance of the cross is one of sacrifice, of giving. We need to embrace the cross. Brethren, that is what is going to unleash the power of God in our midst. And I don't just mean the sacrifice that's talked about there in 1 Corinthians 13 that is devoid of love. I mean a love inflamed, love impassioned, a love for Christ that compels us by that love to lay aside the loves of this world. Brethren, I remember driving out of Michigan, driving down that interstate. Why was I leaving? Because I was looking for God. I was looking for truth. I was looking for where he was working. I wanted to find Christ more fully. I wanted to find his work. I wanted to be involved in missions. And I'm driving down I-94 in southwest Michigan, and the tears are streaming. And I could identify with those scalding tears. Brethren, I left my grandparents behind, never more, except for very short visits, to ever see them in this life. My dad, my stepdad. At that time, what killed me most of all was leaving Craig behind. But God would bring him. But brethren, this is real. This is the sacrifice. This is what he calls us to. Brethren, I'll tell you this. We gotta. I know this has got to be going really long, right? I feel like it's mid-afternoon. Hey, it's not so bad. Brethren, hear me on this. We have a groups in churches, and we've had these folks in here. They're Christians that come and they put a high priority on family to a degree that seems to be rather unbiblical. I had a guy come here from these kind of folks that said, well, I want to join your church, but I'm only going to come to about 25% of the meetings because I need to be with my family. Brethren, let me tell you something. Jesus was teaching one day, You can find it in Mark 3:31, but you don't need to turn there. There's parallel accounts in Matthew 12 and Luke 8. But I want to just give you the heart of it, brethren. Jesus was teaching. You know what happened? Mother, brothers, and sisters, come. I want you to put yourself in Mary's place. Mary, she's got her other sons and daughters. They're coming to get Jesus. He's in a house that's packed. They can't get to him. They send word through the crowd. Jesus is teaching. Word comes to him. Jesus, your mother, your brothers, and your sisters, they're out here waiting for you. Brethren, can you imagine if you're Mary? Possibly a windowless house. I mean, a window's there, a glassless window. Can you imagine if she's standing there and she's hearing? And Jesus says, "Who is my mother and my brothers and my sisters?" Wow. It probably hit you right here. Because you know what that is? That's disowning language. It's like if somebody came to me and said, "Your wife's over here." And I said, "Who's my wife?" You know what he did? He said, "Let me tell you something. I want you to get your priorities right. Because no matter how dear and how close and how intimate you have ever been with your family, no matter how well he loved, how tender and compassionate to his own family he was, no matter how much he upheld God's demands, God's prerogatives with regards to family, Jesus says, "Crowd, you see this motley crew of Galilean fishermen over here? Bunch of backward, not many mighty, not many honorable, not many wise, bunch over here. I want you to see that's my mother and my brothers and my sisters." Brethren, Jesus Christ, look, you need to get this. We need to get this. I know many of you have a lot of connection with the family integrated kind of circles. Brethren, there's no question about it. We need to be the best parents. We need to be the best father, the best husbands. We need to excel. But brethren, we need to excel in the family context following Christ. And anything in that family that would divert us from following Christ needs to be repented of. And one thing I see in this verse right here is one of the things that if any of you have this inclination, like this guy that wanted to join the church, but he was only going to come to 25% of the meetings, I want you to realize this. When you come to this book, the spiritual family is given priority. And you cannot argue that. Jesus does it. I believe that we can see where Paul does it. Brethren, that does not mean we neglect. That does not mean we don't care for. That does not mean that we don't love with a fervent love our families. It doesn't mean that. But brethren, what it does mean is it means that there is a priority in our spiritual family. And the kind of life that would basically, for the sake of your physical family, would despise the spiritual family seems to me to be quite contrary to that verse. Brethren, I cannot conceive of that thought or that mindset that would say, I have to raise my family outside of the context of my spiritual family. I believe that what we have in the Word of God is that we raise our families right in the context of our spiritual family. So, brethren, see that priority. And then here, and we end. I'm going to shoot through 3 passages. The first one is Luke 14:16. Brethren, this you will see is more than just a desire that Christ has for His people. Oh, He does desire this for His people, but it's more than just simply something that Jesus sees to be a good thing for His people, but if it's not there, well, okay, we can get around it. That's not the case. Brethren, I have to tell you, your relationship with your family, there are aspects to it that are absolutely essential to whether you can follow Christ or not. In Luke 14:16, He says, "But Jesus said to him, a man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at that time, for the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.'" You jump to verse 18, "But they all alike began to make excuses." The first one said one thing. You jump to verse 20, and you find that another said, "I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come." And the master said in verse 23, and he says some things. In verse 24, he says this, "I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet." Brethren, I'll tell you this. If Jesus Christ says to you, "Follow me," and you once look back from putting your hand to the plow, or your hand never even gets to the plow, you basically say right up front, "Look, I don't want to go to hell, and I want to have a Christianity that basically allows me to have my family, to follow my family, to do with my family, to be subject to my family, to stay close to my parents, close to my children. That has got to be a priority to me. And the God that I want is a God that allows that. And if I can't have my family, and I can't have all those ties, and I can't have that, and that can't be one of the first and foremost things in my life, if I can't have a God like that, I want you to know this. Jesus Christ comes along. Jesus Christ does not come along later in Luke chapter 14 and basically say, you remember what happened there? Much like what happened, Kenny was talking about in John chapter 6. Great crowds followed him. You can find that in Luke 14. Great crowds following him. Again, he was not interested in keeping the numbers high, folks. Just like he did over there, he winnowed the crowd. And he did it in Luke 14. And you know what he says? He did not come along and say, "Okay, now, Peter, John, James, you guys go over there, and I'm going to send the uncommitted part to you, and you can just have them say the quick sinner's prayer, but we're going to have the deeper, more committed people, the ones that really want to be the disciples, they're going to come over here by me, and to get over here, they're going to have to hate their mother and their father, their husband and their wife, their son and their daughter." We're going to basically have the two-category type of Christianity. The rather uncommitted over there, you guys take them, work with them, get them to say the little prayer over here. But the ones that are really committed, I'm going to get them over here. Brethren, he did not divide people into two groups. He basically says this in Matthew 10, verse 37, "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me." Luke 14:26, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate." Now, brethren, he's not talking about malice, ill will, emotional loathing. He's talking about a radical preference and superiority of Christ in the life that at times is going to look to that family like you hate them because they have their traditions. Well, we do Christmas. I remember that. I come from a Catholic family. Christmas was a big time. What do you think it appeared to my grandparents when I said, "Grandpa, Grandma, I'm not coming to Christmas dinner anymore. I do not find it in the Scriptures. I find a bunch of rich people using God's money to give gifts to a bunch of people that already have everything they could possibly want on the face of this earth, when there are orphans in Africa that I don't have to think for 2 seconds what to get them. I am not going to misuse the Lord's money. There's a spirit about this whole thing that breathes of this world. It is not found in the Scriptures, and I'm not doing it. I don't believe Christ is leading me in this direction. They tried to con me. They tried to trick me. They tried to do every possible thing to get me to come back to that thing. How do you think that appeared? Brethren, it appears hateful, it appears spiteful, it appears like you're rejecting them. The fact is, you're rejecting this world, you're rejecting sin, you're rejecting any way other than that which is following Christ. Now, brethren, listen, and I've been clear on this before. If you can follow Christ and observe Christmas, by all means, do it with conviction, do it with your whole heart. At that point in my life, I could not do it, and I would not do it, and I believed that it would not be right to do it. I can remember standing in a mall on Christmas Eve, and I'm trying to figure out something to buy my grandfather, a man who has everything. And I'm in there, and I'm like a rock in the midst of just a swarm of water flowing all around me, and I thought, this is it. I'm thinking of orphans in Africa in the middle of all the Christmas trees and the people in a frantic fury. And I just thought, Lord, I can't do this. Brethren, Jesus Christ was not interested in drawing a crowd. He was interested in drawing the committed. And he is serious about men and women following him. This idea today that's going around that people can be Christians and they can say this prayer and they can basically live any way under the sun, it's so absolutely contrary to what Christ had to say. And he goes and he spearheads the family, the closest relationships, the closest things, the closest affections. And you will at times. You know what? It is not a mystery to me why a whole number of the parents of young people that attend this church don't like me and have had problems, because what they're seeing is their sons and their daughters now not regarding their counsel, not regarding their traditions, not regarding their wishes and their hopes and their dreams for their young people. I mean, there was one young lady just recently who was coming to the church. Not that her parents got too bent out of shape, but you can understand. Here she is. She and her parents, no doubt, had aspirations that she go to dental school, and God has saved her, and God has saved this guy that she wants to marry, and they're trying to go along and follow the Lord now. And my counsel to her was, don't go to dental school. Basically, be a wife to your husband, raise children, go on that route, follow the Lord. This seems to be what he calls us to, and young ladies in his word, be workers at home, be pure, basically be these Proverbs 31 women. And she did that. She told her parents, I'm not going to dental school. Brethren, you can understand how that kind of thing can wreck parents' dreams and visions and hopes for their children. And it's like, and then what happens? Oh, I know what the problem is. It's that brethren, if you love anybody more than you love him, you're not worthy of him. You need to ask yourself this question. Are you worthy of Christ? Brethren, back several years ago, I heard this story at a missions conference, and it fits right in with this whole thing, and I'll end with this. In Fox's Book of Martyrs, during the years of the Covenanters in Scotland, you may know about them in the 1680s. Many of them were put to death. Many of them were hunted down. These Covenanters, the vast majority of them, it seems to be, were followers of Christ. Here's a young lady, Scottish woman. She's a mother with a year-old little child. They apprehend her. Why? Probably she was attending some of the meetings of the Covenanters. They found her. They tried her. They found her guilty. 20 years old. She's captured. You know what her major crime was? She would not give allegiance to the king. What kind of allegiance? Wait, doesn't the Bible say that we should obey the king? Yes. We do not resist the laws of the countries, the laws of the nations, the laws of the United States, the laws of our president, the laws of our Congress, the laws that are enforced by our policemen. We do not resist those laws because Jesus, in telling us to follow Him, tells us that these governments are put in place by God and under His authority. He says, follow me, and in following Him, we follow His word, we follow the instruction of the apostles. But brethren, do you know what allegiance that king wanted? He wanted her to admit that he was the head of the church, not Jesus Christ. She said, there's no king of the church but Christ. She had a little year-old baby, and they wrenched that baby away from her breast. And they shoved her in a cell. And you know what they would do? They would come daily. A year-old baby. Brethren, is there ever affection like that that a mother has for its newborn baby? They would come to the bars on that cell door, and they would hold that little baby up. It was much like it was with Bunyan. If you'll simply say you won't preach, you can go take care of your blind daughter. They'd bring this little baby up. The baby would see its mother and just scream and wail to have that mother. It wanted its mother. It would hold out its arms. There's the baby at the bars. And they said, all you have to say is the king is head of the church. All you have to do is say the words. That's it. But you see, brethren, in saying it, that would not be to follow Christ. Because it's not true. Jesus Christ is the head of the church, crying through the bars for her mother, weeping with tears to hold her again, the mother would be. All you have to do is deny that Christ is the head of the church. All you have to do is say the king is head. She said, I can't do it. They continued to bring that baby until finally one day they brought that baby and they said, this is it. This is your last chance. This woman weeping and sighing, she bowed her head. She said, Jesus Christ is head of the church. And they took that little baby away, and she never saw it again, and she died in that cell. Brethren, that's not fiction. Of everything that there is that could be said that's truth about the family, He who is the full radiance of the glory of God came to this earth to bear witness of the truth. And in all of His life, what is recorded for us in His words concerning the family, He upholds what God had said in prior times. He, by His own life, is the perfect example. But the vast majority of what He had to say has to do with sacrifice, division, not loving family more, putting our hand to the plow and not looking back, letting the dead bury their dead, looking to his spiritual family and saying, there's my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and saying, if you don't hate your family, if there isn't something that is real and true and living and dynamic about your life that doesn't come across as though you hate your family, that doesn't appear to them that way, that doesn't send that signal to them, he doesn't say, brethren, then you fall in a lesser category of Christianity. He says, you are not worthy of me and you cannot be my disciple. He lays it on the line, folks. Your family goes on the altar. All on the altar. He's not kidding. He's not messing around. This is it. This is the call to us. Brethren, in all that we could say about parenting, being husbands, being wives, all that there is, all the books that are written on the family, and he who is living truth himself comes and says, of everything there is to know about the family, here is what is most important. I looked at all those verses and I just thought, it's clear. It's clear. The family according to Jesus is a family laid on the altar. May God help us, brethren. May Christ have all our affection. You ever considered Hudson Taylor? He let his wife go off to West China. Why? There were women over there who were in darkness and had not heard the truth. He let her go. She was gone. What? You ready to let your wife go for the sake of the gospel? Brother Andy was saying that since he's been in the country he labors in, he and his wife are apart 50% of the time. They had to leave their children back here in the United States. They left their grandchildren. Brethren, when I left Michigan, except for a few minor short visits, I left my family. All three of my grandparents died. My dad died. My stepdad died. And for that time I've been here, I rarely ever saw them. I came here for the gospel. It was a wrenching. It was a tearing. But brethren, I want to follow Christ at all costs. I look at my children. You know, brethren, I was just telling Craig what a blessing it was that his daughter and son-in-law lived so close to him. That is a blessing. They live 5-10 minutes apart from each other. That's a blessing when we have our children close. But brethren, I can say with all my heart, if God were to take all 4 of my children and they were to follow Christ and love Christ and they were all to be dead before they were 30, they didn't live just down the street. I didn't get to enjoy all my grandchildren, but they followed Christ and they followed him to the death. And they took the gospel to places of darkness. Brethren, wouldn't you prefer that? Would you prefer Jack went and gave his life and was dead by the time he was 29, like Henry Martin or Brainerd, rather than to live to be 90 years old, have a huge family, have become a very well-known doctor, but die and leave behind a life that simply is not worthy of Christ? Brethren, are you following him at all costs? You can't get away from it. Jesus doesn't let us go. It's not like he says, okay, you guys can go have a study in your church on family and kind of depart from the gospel, depart from the kingdom, depart from me being king. He says, no. You want to talk family? pull this thing right in, include me, put me in the middle, put me supreme, put me as the all-out allegiance of your heart, because that's what I demand. Let your family revolve around me. I am the center. I am the core. I am the sun. I am central. I am supreme. And all of this revolves around me. Brethren, lay it down. That's what he wants us to know. And I'm done. Amen. You're dismissed.